talk Brock Purdy for a minute. You cover the Niners. You cover the Eagles. I was talking to a couple personnel people this week, and we were talking about Brock Purdy and his contract and what lies ahead and this and that. We were trying to find a comp, and I said he kind of reminds me of Hurts, okay? And the two scouts that I was talking to, both were like, Brock Purdy's world's better than Hurts. And I'm like, really? Yeah. Really? And one of the guys said to me, Brock Purdy has had way more on his table since he's first started with the 49ers. The guys both said that Jalen Hurts didn't set protections until this year. Now, you're covering this team on a regular basis. Is that true? Is it true that Jalen Hurts didn't set protections with the Eagles until this season?
Yeah, Jason Kelce did, and that was his job. And when you have a Hall of Fame center, probably the best center of this generation, who had been doing that throughout his entire career, you can understand why the Eagles gave Jason Kelce that leeway, because he's a terrific player, cerebral, high football IQ, and so Hurts didn't do that. And I think that resulted in a lot of the struggles that he had last year, where he couldn't audible, there were no hots, the route concepts were very vanilla, the play calling wasn't great from Brian Johnson, and the offense sputtered. This year, Hurts has set protections, he's made audibles, and I actually think he's done a pretty good job in handling that on his plate. The Dallas Goedert touchdown against the Green Bay Packers in the wild card round, when Goddard had that angry run, that was a Hurts audible at the line of scrimmage. There were 7 guys up front. Hurts called the audible. He knew that the pressure was coming, had to get rid of it quick to Goddard. It resulted in a touchdown. And so he's done a pretty good job of that. I see where you're coming from in comparing not the players that they are, but just the fact that Hurts needs a good supporting cast to be successful. Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, arguably the best offensive line. We saw this year, Brock Purdy can't really carry a team. But here's the thing. There are very few quarterbacks in the NFL who can carry a team with not great complementary parts. And I think the only quarterbacks in the league who can do that are Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. There's 4 of them in the NFL. And so Purdy and Hurts need a good supporting cast, and they need some things going in their direction to reach their utmost potential. And so I see where you're coming from with that. But as far as throwing the football, making quick decisions, going through progressions, throwing with touch, timing, accuracy, yeah, I do think Brock Purdy is better than Jalen Hurts in that regard.
So Spot Track projected Purdy's contract will be 4 years, $194 million, with $100 million guaranteed. That's 48.5 per year.
Okay, interesting.
That's what Spot Track is saying. Okay. It's interesting too. I've said that, and it's funny that is right in line with what Greg Papa was saying on the radio about 10 days ago, that the Niners would love to get Brock in the high 40s range. And that would be it right there. 4 years, 194, $100 million guaranteed, 48.5 AAV. And I've been saying in the past that I think Purdy's in that $45 to $55 million range. But after talking to some of my NFL contacts from around the league in the last week, the people that seem to be most in the know seem to believe that Brock's deal is going to be north of $60 million. I think to those who are like, well, the Niners, if they pay Brock $60 million, they won't be able to build a good team around him. I don't know if I believe that. I mean, I know that the margins are going to be tighter, but I think Howie Roseman is proof that you can pay a quarterback $50 million plus and still have a stacked depth chart. I mean, Philly is proof of that right now. They have a stacked depth chart, and they're paying Jalen Hurts north of $50 million. But to me, and it's more about, and the Niners, I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, it's more about the Niners need to get this done at whatever figure on time. Having this done before camp is more important than getting a good deal. I'd rather get a bad deal and pay Brock too much and have what some people would say is an unfavorable team deal and have it done before July than get a great deal, but it doesn't get done until the middle of August. I think you're shooting yourself in the foot, and you won't be able to overcome it if you get to July and Brock Purdy is holding out. That is going to be hugely negative as far as their chances of winning this year. They have to get it done on time, even if it's not the number that they want. But the other thing I thought was interesting, Chase, and I discovered this by just looking at his bio. Kyle Strongen, who is the agent for Brock Purdy from Range Sports out of Nashville, according to his online bio, he used to work in the 49er organization as a player personnel in the player personnel department as a scouting assistant. So he also worked for Ole Miss and as a pro in their football operations department. He worked for University of Tennessee in their football operations department. I think he played football maybe even at the University of Oklahoma. So this guy's got a football background, but that's kind of an interesting little wrinkle. He worked for the Niners during the Mike Nolan, Mike Singletary era in the player personnel department as a scouting assistant. So he knows Parag. He knows the Niners brass. And this is before Lynch and Shanahan, but he knows Jed probably, and he knows Dr. John. He probably has a lot of good contacts. I don't know what it ultimately means, but to me that's interesting that the agent for Brock Purdy at one point was in the 49er organization. That's pretty rare.
Yeah, no doubt. And a couple of things that you kind of ran through there that I want to hit on.
Yeah.
This isn't disrespectful to Brock Purdy if I have the opinion that it would be a huge win for the 49ers if they can get him on that Spotrac deal of less than $50 million. I think that Brock Purdy is an elite quarterback in this league. What he's done since becoming the starter in 2022 really kind of has been unprecedented given where he was drafted, the success that he's had, making it to 2 NFC championship games and a Super Bowl, and the elite numbers that he's been able to put up. And I know that the market is the market and the going rate is the going rate, but if you're a Niner fan, you should actually be rooting for Brock Purdy to get a contract under $50 million because that means that you're getting a good value play and you're able to build up the rest of your football team. And let me use that as a segue to get to the next point here. In building the football team, you give Brock Purdy $50 to $60 million, you're not going to be able to have a good complementary roster. Look, I think that's false. And I think you using the Philadelphia Eagles is a really good example of that because that is a loaded roster. They are savvy with the cap led by Howie Roseman. They fleece teams in trades all of the time. They do a great job of stockpiling talent in the NFL draft, and they've been able to replace a lot of players in the NFL draft. Hitting on those picks, replacing some players is something that the Niners haven't done. But the NFL salary cap is also going to continue to be on the uptick. And so with the salary cap going up and the booming popularity of the league, a contract for Purdy of $50 to $60 million in 5 years actually might be also a pretty good bargain deal because the quarterback contracts are going to be more expensive. And just wait for a player like Micah Parsons, who's going to be in the market for $40 million per year. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. As far as Purdy's agent working for the Niners organization, I think that he has a really good relationship with San Francisco. I think the Niners have a really good relationship with Purdy and his camp. And I'm with you. I think you have to get this deal done early. You have to learn from your mistakes of seasons prior. When you let these contract drama situations play out, it is a little bit of a dark cloud hovering over your team. But football is the ultimate game of continuity, of camaraderie, of timing, of reps. When you have 11 guys on each side of the ball, there's a reason why these practices are so exhaustive and so detail-oriented because everybody has to be on the same page. And I think that Brock Purdy not having Trent Williams, not having Brandon Ayuk, not having Christian McCaffrey directly led to this Niners team looking and performing as though they were a disjointed offense. They committed so many penalties. They lacked momentum. When they got inside the red zone, they looked lost. They weren't able to be an efficient unit. And if Brock Purdy holds out, if you let this contract linger, you cannot go through training camp and the preseason with a second and third string quarterback and expect to hit the ground running in week one. This division has improved. This conference has improved. You got to come out of the gates quick, and you want a full offseason with players who have been hurt now getting healthy to get on the same page, to get back at it for 2025. And lastly, a timing standpoint of when the Niners might get this deal done. They've signed some of their other players to contracts late, right before training camp, at the start of training camp, during training camp, or in the case of Nick Bosa, right before the regular season. It's different with the quarterback. Those are positional players. You have other players who are depth pieces who can step in, and they can serve those roles until those players come back. I hate when those players sign these deals late because then they're out of shape. With the quarterback position, you simply can't do that. You also can't afford to let the market reset itself like the Niners did with Brandon Ayuk. If they signed him earlier in the offseason last year, they could have gotten him at $25 million. But they waited. The wide receiver market got reset on multiple occasions, and they had to overpay, in my opinion, a little bit for Brandon Ayuk. But with Jimmy Garoppolo and the Niners on February 8th of 2018, that's when the Niners and Garoppolo agreed to a 5-year contract worth $137.5 million at the time. I think we're going to see, given the importance of the quarterback position, good relationship, familiarity between Purdy's camp and the Niners, this deal get done early, get it out of the way, and then it also in turn helps your team building strategy for the rest of the offseason.
You had a tweet about Dre Greenlaw. I'm going to share the screen on this one. And I agree completely. PFF had Greenlaw as their 18th best free agent, and they projected him to get a 1-year deal for $6 million. And you said if I was John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, I'd sign him to that in a heartbeat. In fact, if this is his market, I think you start your rebuild for this next season by signing him. Yep. 1 year, $6 million. I mean, that's a screaming deal. I think PFF got that wrong. I think he's probably got a bigger market than that. That's my guess. But I could be wrong because he was hurt this year. He is, he's had some injuries. He doesn't play the premium position. So there's always a chance that could be his market. And sure enough, I'm sure they didn't do nothing. They did some research when they put together this article. But doesn't 1 year, $6 million seem too good to be true?
Sounds way too good to be true.
Yeah,
and if that is the market for Dre Greenlaw, I'm giving him that contract ASAP because he's a really special player who is the enforcer, the leader, and the engine of that defense. I know there are a lot of injury concerns, not just with the Achilles, but in 2023 and in 2022, he had more than 100 tackles. Pretty much every season outside of that, he's been an injured player. But I think that there will be teams who understand how special of a player he is. And with these modern day NFL concepts, I think the linebacker position has become so important with teams running it more, but also teams spreading it out more. And the athletes that we see who can catch the ball out of the backfield as a running back, slot receivers, tight ends, operating over the middle of the field, that teams know that a player like Dre Greenlaw is so important. And so they'll be willing to pay him despite the injury concerns. But if that is indeed the market, I'm giving Dre Greenlaw that contract, but I'm upping it a little bit, knowing how important he is to this defense and how much the Niners missed him.
Let's talk about linebacker options. I was just looking at the list of Jets free agents now that Saleh is the defensive coordinator. And I came up with 6 guys that I think are pretty interesting. And, of course, some of them you would expect, right? DJ Reed, who, man, he would help the Niners. I mean, though he did have 11 penalties this year, which was his career high. So maybe he's on the downside. He's 28, but he probably get an offer bigger than what the Niners can afford. But there's other guys for the Jets that are really intriguing. Jamie Sherwood had an incredible year. He's one of the hardest working guys in pro football. He's an undersized linebacker. He had 18 tackles against Miami. If the Niners wanted to go for Jamie Sherwood, I'd be all about that. There's Ashton Davis. There's Solomon Thomas. There's Lecky Fotu. But the other guy that's kind of interesting, I think, is Chaz Surratt, who was a quarterback at Carolina, big, strong, fast. I mean, runs in the 4.5s, 27 reps at 225. Didn't really play much for the Jets this year. 28 tackles in the 2024 season, but that's because the Jets have good linebackers. But I remember from training camp when Saleh was there with Hard Knocks that he really liked Surratt. And I remember a couple meetings where he said that he likes Surratt, who's obviously fast and smart and tough, competitive. What do you think? Is of those guys, those 6 guys that I just named, is there one that you could see the Niners going after, trying to bring Saleh, maybe 1 or 2 of his Jets players with him?
Yeah, I'm looking at the top 100 Pro Football Focus free agents, and some of the names that you mentioned are on there. Dre Greenlaw is the highest ranked linebacker in this free agency class. You have a player like Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs, who's an excellent instinctual player, and Steve Spagnuolo has done a great job with his development, but I think he's going to be a little bit too expensive for the Niners, maybe $13 to $15 million per year. Pretty incredible story with Bobby Wagner. Dude's about to be 35 years old. He has been really good for that Commanders team. But as a veteran player, if you then draft some young players, Bobby Wagner alongside Fred Warner, if you lose Dre Greenlaw, I wouldn't be opposed to that. There's Ernest Jones. There's Zach Bond, who was a first-team All-Pro and finalist for Defensive Player of the Year this year for the Eagles in his first year as an off-ball coverage linebacker. Jamian Sherwood, Levante David. Robert Spillane is a player who isn't great in coverage, but he's a tackling machine, plays the game in a way that really translates to the Niners style of physical and willing to beat you up. Tyrell Dotson is another one. And then there's Eric Kendricks, who had a Pro Football Focus grade of 75.2. That was 13th among 82 linebackers. I actually think that the Niners probably wish they could have signed him and finalized that deal, because he left the Niners to sign with the Cowboys. They were then left with Devondre Campbell, and Eric Kendricks would have been so much of a better player. How about D. Winters and Tatum Bethune, though? Are you high on those guys? Because those are players who you can elevate at that linebacker spot if you believe in their development moving forward, who can also be a part of that linebacking core too. I think those are names to keep an eye on internally for the Niners.